Usually in the NHL, when you outshoot a team 2-1 and you control possession the way the Oilers did tonight against the Anaheim Ducks, you run away in a laugher. Unfortunately, these are the 2024-2025 Edmonton Oilers. They lost on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Loser Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis, coming up on 1 year as the host of Locked On Oilers, more than 10 years into doing digital hockey content. On today's show, a whole lot to get to, unpacking the loss to the Anaheim Ducks. But first, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money today. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year subscription. So we're going to unpack this game against the Ducks in three separate segments. Number one, we're going to start the show by talking about efficiency in offense, what not having McDavid and Draisaitl does in terms of how the Oilers need to play, why it's been a reflection at large of the team's offense for the majority of this season. Our second segment, we're going to tackle what happens when a game gets out of control in terms of energy, the way this game did, where Radko Gudas went after Corey Perry 2 separate times, a lot of after the whistle stuff, but it never really reached that boiling point to a fight. And then we'll tie a bow on this show talking about how much you can take away from these games when the Oilers are playing shorthanded. So to start things out, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to picture the most efficient way you could possibly score a goal. That would be you skating at the goalie directly as if it were a breakaway. The best way to get where you want to be is to go there in a straight line. No delineations, no weaving, no traffic. But we know that's not how hockey works. But when we have advantages to get those more favorable situations, those more favorable game states, we want to take advantage of them. You think about the one goal the Ducks scored tonight, I believe it was the second goal, where Cutter Gauthier went around Evan Bouchard and just drove the net. In an ideal world, that's what you want to do. You want to skate the puck to the net and force defenders to cut down your angle. You want to force defenders to make you move the puck. And when you are missing your dynamic players, your guys who can kind of overcome the environment that's around them, it's going to put a lot more of an onus on your team to maintain structure and to maintain rigidity. What do we always tell teams when they're underhanded, when they're playing against a team that's missing players or they have less talent than the team they're playing? What do we always tell them? We tell teams that are less talented to try and slow the game down, to dump the puck in deep, to go and get it, to win that loose puck, to settle in the offensive zone where you get your 2-1-2 or your 1-2-2 forecheck going, where you're trying to pressure that puck carrier, you're trying to establish zone time, and then from there, you're going to try and build out possession. And by and large, that's what the Oilers did tonight. They had a majority of possession for the entire game. And when you have a game like this, sometimes, and I'll be fair, I think Dostal, the Ducks goalie, is pretty good. I want to give credit where it's due. He had a tremendous game tonight, and in general, he's been a pretty good goalie for the Ducks. But when you're an Oilers team that is so desperate for anything resembling offense, and you play relatively well, I wouldn't say the Oilers dominated this game as thoroughly as the box score would say they did, but they had a majority of the possession. The last 5 minutes of this game, they had 8-9 really good looks. Some of that is a testament to just the Ducks not being a particularly good team. In particular, the defense, the Ducks in their own ends, their transition play was egregious. So many unforced errors, so many just blind firing the puck up ice and hoping it would go where they wanted it to. And they were able to survive this game by the skin of their teeth. The Oilers must have had 5 golden chances in the last 90 seconds before the game ended. And when you lose a game like this, it forces you to take a step back and think about your efficiency and how you play offense. We discussed this the other day on the show last week, and I do think it's worth reiterating here really briefly if you're not an everydayer. When you can't get the puck where you want it to consistently, when you can't get the puck between the circles, down in that slot area, or in and around the net mouth, you are going to have to work significantly harder to create offense. And without McDavid and Draisaitl to kind of open things up, to create more space, that means your guys are going to have to work a lot harder than the opposition because they don't have the automatic zone entry that Draisaitl and McDavid present them going from defense to offense through the neutral zone with speed. Instead, they have to dump the puck in. They have to go win that puck. They have to get that puck to the next wave of forecheckers so they can establish their forecheck. And because of that, it requires more things to go right for you. And if you play this game 100 times, the Oilers probably win 90 of them. When you have this aggressive of a shot split, it's very uncommon to see a team lose in this way. And look, the Oilers, for a good chunk of this game, did not have particularly dangerous scoring chances. And that's really the key to understanding how you lose a game like this. We talk about this all of the time in regards to certain teams in the playoffs. How come the Carolina Hurricanes can't get to the conference final or a Stanley Cup final? It's because they fling pucks at the net from every which way, because they don't have the high ends. They don't have a McKinnon, a McDavid, a Draisaitl, a Rantanen, a Pasternak, a Panarin, a Kucherov, a Point. When you don't have one of those really high-end offensive players to make up for the quality of the shot they're creating, when you have to approach by volume, it makes scoring consistently more challenging. It makes being an offense based on volume almost impossible at a certain point when you get to the NHL playoffs. You think about, to tie this back to the Oilers, you think about the final 10 minutes of Game 7 against Florida last year. The Oilers had a ton of possession. The Panthers, to their credit, played great defense. Every time you're in the offensive zone, you need to string together 5 or 6 passes to get the puck to create one good look. How many passes you need to string together to get 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 good looks? And if we want to go by basic math and we want to say NHL average shooting percentage is like 9.5, 9.6, how many times would you need to string together 5 passes in a row for one shot on goal to register one good scoring chance you think that's going to go in? So if you want to do the rough envelope math, we said it takes 6 or 7 passes to string together for one good scoring chance. And we need 10 good scoring chances, and we're going to score on 1 out of those 10. We're saying we need to string together 50 or 60 passes to register 1 goal. And that's just offensive zone cycle-based passes. That doesn't account for defensive zone passes. That doesn't account for transition. There are a lot of layers to how your offense becomes this defanged, this unpotent. You know, it's crazy to think about an Oilers team that scores at a below average rate when it has the caliber of player it does. And has the supporting cast lived up to its paper expectations? No, it hasn't. And I do think there's some greater conversation to be had about that before the playoffs. And I'll definitely do a bit of more of a statistical deep dive on the macro of the team at large in comparison to league-wide trends, because we know statistically it's harder to register a shot on goal from a scoring chance this year than it was last year. And I'm curious to see if that's a league-wide phenomena, if scoring chances are down at large, or if that happens to be unique to the Oilers because of the stylistic changes they've undergone, because of the personnel changes they've undertaken. But that will do it for our first segment of this unfortunate loss that we're going to have to account for the next 20 minutes. But when we come back, we are going to tackle, when a game gets out of hand, what that means in the modern parlance of hockey, why I don't really buy the whole gentleman's game shtick that hockey media people, legacy hockey media people like to talk about, and a whole lot more on this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. So be sure to stick around. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's really easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in as your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, though. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I first started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on takeout. Now, I budget smarter, I meal prep, and I save more. Monarch Money features all-in-one convenience. You don't need multiple apps. You can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan out long-term financial goals. So, take control of your finances with Monarch Money today. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year subscription. One more time now, that's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year subscription. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Loser Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers, walking through a 3-2 loss at the hands of the Anaheim Ducks, which is unfortunate on multiple levels. The Oilers had an opportunity here to make up some ground in regards to their position in the Pacific Division, with the Kings also losing on Monday night into Tuesday night, I should say. When you have those opportunities to leapfrog a team or to come even with a team, and we talked about it on yesterday's show, as the everydayers know, because of the way tiebreakers are set up, because the Kings have more regulation wins, the Oilers aren't just the amount of standings points they are behind the Kings. You got to tack on one more, because if the Oilers and Kings were to finish with the same record, tiebreakers would put the Kings ahead of them. So you missed an opportunity to make up ground on a team that you're going to likely play in the first round. Number two, you had a million chances to get in this game. And I give the Oilers, and this is going to sound kind of sad and frankly a little pathetic, but I give the Oilers a lot of credit for not folding in this game at 3-1. As somebody who's watched some of the other teams around the NHL down the backstretch here, teams like the Rangers, teams like the Bruins, where they have excuses, their injuries, they're not playing well. They have thrown up that white flag on more than one occasion down the backstretch here of these final 15 or so regular season games after the trade deadline. And to their credit, the Oilers hung in this game as best they could with the limitations they had. You're down to your organizational third goalie and Olivier Rodrigue, who I think was fine. I don't feel like he should have really had any of the three Anaheim goals to a degree that I would be mad. Do you ever want to give up 3 goals on like 19 shots on goal? I think what the Ducks ended up having at when all said, 21 is what the Ducks finished with, excuse me. Do you really want to be giving up 1/7 the scoring chances against as a goal? No, you don't. But I don't think Rodrigue gave them an effort that was disqualifying in any way, made them feel like they couldn't win this game. And I did not feel any particular way about Rodrigue getting the start tonight. I think Chris Knobloch is very much aware that Calvin Pickard is not a bell cow starter, and starting someone like Pickard 6-7 games in a row probably wasn't tenable to continue maintaining quality results. But as far as this game tonight, this brings up something I talk about all the time on the show, and that's the idea of the code. And I am not somebody who is an NHL hockey player. Obviously, I'm sitting here doing Locked On Oilers, which I very much enjoy doing. I don't envy the guys who get punched in the face for a living. It's not a great way to make a living. That said, I generally look at what we consider physical play as extraneous. I look at it as, well, you can't make the material hockey play. You can't pass it where it needs to go. You can't score it. You can't play good defense. You're on the team because you're willing to eat punishment. You're on the team because you're tougher than other guys. And that has value. Those are virtuous traits. Don't get me wrong. My problem here is that someone like Radko Gudas, who's a good hockey player, go look at the underlying numbers. You'd be thoroughly impressed with Gudas's defensive profile. there's no need for the type of stuff he does on a regular basis. And you could say, well, he's trying to set the tone. He's a veteran on a team of young guys. He wants to send a message that the Ducks aren't easy to play against. Fine. Operate within the confines of the rules. Sticking your elbow out and hitting Corey Perry in the jaw and Perry coming back in the game, forearm shivering him in the small of the back on a pass through the neutral zone that ended up going through the both of them. Those both got missed. The officials just didn't see it or didn't think that met the threshold of a penalty. And you can't tell me sitting here that Radko Gudas has respect for his opponents. And that's always something that has irked me when we talk about this type of play in hockey, because we're all supposed to have a baseline level of respect. I'm not saying everyone needs to be friends. I'm not saying everyone needs to go out for dinner before they play or they need to be cordial during warmups. I'm saying we're all playing a very dangerous game here. I'm saying that because we all understand the risks associated with taking this job, with playing in the NHL, that we need to be respectful of the other guys out there and not do anything outside of what we would want someone else to do to ourselves. And occasionally you hear a guy say something along the lines when they get hit with a dirty play. Like, for example, last year, during the playoffs, Sam Bennett sucker punches Marchand in the middle of that play, and Marchand comes back and says, it's a rat play, it's a dirty play, but that's part of hockey. I don't understand how you adopt that mentality when you were wronged and like objectively wronged. You can't convince me that throwing hits that injure guys that are entirely unnecessary are part of hockey, because they're not. And part of what makes hockey unique in that respect is the game is supposed to take care of itself, in that if the referees are not properly adjudicating the rules, it's within the confines of the rules for the players to get that adjudication they would like. And I do think it's a little bit concerning on two levels. Number one, the Oilers desperately needed something to get them going in this game. And ultimately, they got the Jeff Skinner goal down the backstretch in the third period. They crawled. They got back in the mix. They ended up only losing by 1. This was a game that was crying out for someone to do something. And I am not a huge proponent of fighting. I don't think it serves a particularly useful purpose with where the game is at today. But if there was ever a game for Corey Perry, for Darnell Nurse to get into a scrap just for the sake of getting into a scrap, this might have been the game, because number one, the Ducks were taking liberty with your guys, and that can't stand. Number two, when you can't score on the power plays after they do get called for penalties, Ryan Strome got 2 minor penalties for his role in the one scrum in the second period. That happened right at the end of the second period, and those power plays carried over into the third. If you can't score on those man advantages to make the other team pay, you need to do something to get that game back on the tracks. And luckily, Perry was able to come back. Luckily, Vasily Podkolzin was able to come back. It looked like he bended his leg particularly awkwardly, but very luckily. Doesn't seem like that's going to be something that's going to keep him out of the lineup. We'll see. Knock on wood, the Oilers have really had a tough go of it with the injury bug between Draisaitl and Ekholm and McDavid and Klingberg and Skinner, and at various points this year, Hyman and Nugent-Hopkins. And you need guys to be as healthy as they can be going into the playoffs. We're going to take one more break on today's show. We're going to tie a bow on this episode, trying to discern how much you can actually take away from a game where the Oilers are missing 3 of their 4 most important players and their starting goalie, and a whole lot more on this edition of Locked On Oilers, where you've got your team covered every day. Did you just realize your business needed to hire someone like yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. We've all been in that spot where we need the right hire like yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a major setback to your team. That's exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. And now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we make our way through a busy week. And the games are winding down. The math is becoming increasingly less favorable by the day. As we discussed on Monday's episode, more likely than not, the Oilers are going to start on the road in the postseason for the first time in the McDavid Draisaitl era. It is not wholly disqualifying to need to go on the road, but it makes the reality of pursuing a 3 or 4 round postseason all the more challenging because those little advantages, last change, putting your stick down second in the defensive zone on faceoffs, the little things accumulate. Getting treatment at your own facility as opposed to a road facility. There are little things that do begin to accumulate the longer you are in the postseason. And I don't think it's a coincidence. You're watching the Oilers deal with the volume of injuries they are this year in relation to the years they've had over the last few playoffs in regards to just the volume of playoff games they've been in over the last few years. They've played the second most playoff series of any team over the last 3 years, other than the Florida Panthers, who of course went to 2 straight Stanley Cup finals. I think when you look at McDavid, Draisaitl, Ekholm, Bouchard, Nuge to some extent, Hyman to some extent, those guys have a lot of miles on them over the last handful of years. And the Oilers run one of the most aggressive minute splits in the entire NHL of any team in terms of how often they use their best players. And yes, when you have a McDavid, a Draisaitl, an Ekholm, a Bouchard, a Zach Hyman, you want to get them out there as frequently as you possibly can because that's how you win hockey games. You play your best players the most minutes and you deal with the consequences later. Now, I do think there's something to be said for reaching an inflection point in the relationship between usage and efficiency. I do think you can burn the candle at both ends a little bit too much, especially when we're talking about an 82-game regular season, which can at times feel like a marathon. And I've made that illusion a ton over the course of the year that the Oilers are just starting to get to maybe the second half of that marathon as the playoffs loom on the not so far horizon. And part of tuning up your mentality for the playoffs, and the way I like to think about it, you are mentally preparing yourself for the most arduous part of the season, both as a fan and as a player. In the playoffs, one goal can be the difference between taking home the best trophy in all of sports and being if you pulled it off, it would have been the best comeback ever. All it takes is one goal, and you're having very different conversations about the NHL at large over the last year. And it's funny, I was trying to put together what I wanted to talk about in this final segment. So I was scrolling through a bunch of different places, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, just trying to come up with a way I wanted to talk about this, the ideas behind one game when you're missing so many things. It's hard to evaluate where the Oilers are at when they're missing their 2 best centers, their best defensive defenseman, their starting goalie, John Klingberg, Trent Frederick, and all of that against the backdrop of, the Ducks aren't really that alive. They're still trying. They are professional hockey players, but they don't need this game. And the Oilers, frankly, haven't played like they've needed a game in quite a while. And I heard someone say this as I was scrolling through, and I apologize for not writing down the creator's name, but he said, in sports, we don't give you credit for working hard until you win. because we deem winning a virtuous trait, the assumption is you had to work hard to do it. And we typically deride people who can't capitalize on that potential because, well, if they worked hard, they would have won. We have a direct one-to-one correlation with the idea that hard work pays off, that meritocracy ultimately prevails in sports, that the most deserving team wins. Of course, that's not how sports actually work in practice. We understand there's luck, there's a million different situational variables that happen over the course of an entire game, regardless of the sport. But the idea being, a lot of people gave the Oilers credit last year for finally breaking through, making the Stanley Cup final for the first time in 19 years since the year they lost to Carolina coming out of the lockout. That wasn't exactly proof of concept. You had to get over that hump line. You had to get past Florida. So you came back into this year with proof of concept in that you could win the West, that Connor could go nuclear. He could have 41 points in 23 playoff games, that Leon, that Bouchard can be over point per games, that Zach Hyman can lead the entire playoffs in goals. But, and this is one of the real conundrums, that was last year. Last year doesn't have a whole lot of bearing on what's to come. And that's really the trick as far as forecasting and predictions. You only have access to the past, and information can be useful in determining a big picture question. I can tell you what an average Zach Hyman NHL season looks like based on his 10 years in the league. You could even do what an average Zach Hyman Oilers season looks like. And I think by and large, you would get a pretty accurate description of a player or a team the bigger your sample size. That's why trying to analyze one single game with all of the circumstantial factors that are working against the Oilers right now at the same time, it makes this a challenging endeavor because we know when the playoffs start, regardless of how healthy Connor, Leon, Ekholm, Frederick, Skinner are, those guys are all probably coming into this lineup. We'll see about John Klingberg, whether he's the first guy out or last guy in. And that leaves a lot on the table. And I tweeted it when the game was 3-1 with, I think, 6 or 7 minutes to go. And I said, I find it very hard to believe this Oilers team is going to be able to go on a run. They haven't played great hockey in almost 2 months now. The last time I felt good about the way the Oilers were playing, we were going into the Four Nations and they had just lost the game against Colorado. And, well, we're going to get a reset. Everyone who's not representing a country is going to get a nice 2 weeks off. And yeah, is it going to be taxing on the guys who go and Ekholm and McDavid? Yeah, it will be, but those guys want to go and it's their right to go because they've earned that right. But as we sit here a month and change later, it is hard to feel good about where the Oilers are at. And you can't ever count out Connor and Leon. If any team is capable of just turning on that switch and going nuclear and making this happen, it's a team with 2 of the 5 best players in the world on it. Is it likely? Probably not. But that's why we play the games, and that's why sports are the best. That will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL, covering the biggest stories from around the league with the local expertise of Locked On. Check it out wherever you get your podcasts. I will talk to you guys tomorrow ahead of the game against the hottest team in the NHL, who did lose to the Jets on Monday, but the St. Louis Blues had won 12 in a row before that. I will talk to you guys then.